The arrival. The sky burned with fire. A fleet of massive alien ships descended through the clouds, their sleek, silver bodies cutting through the atmosphere like silent predators. They had traveled across the galaxy, searching for a new home. And finally, they have found one. Earth. From orbit, it looked like a perfect planet. Lush green forests, vast blue oceans, towering mountains. The scans had been clear. No intelligent life detected. Commander Yelena stood at the front of the viewing deck, her violet eyes scanning the world below. She was tall, elegant with dark metallic armor wrapped around her slender frame. Beside her, Lieutenant Vexa adjusted the holographic display. "The planet is empty," Vexa reported. "No threats. No civilizations. We can begin colonization immediately." Yelena nodded. This was a historic moment. Their species, the Zavari, had been searching for a new home for centuries. War had destroyed their own planet. Now, Earth would be theirs. With a wave of her hand, she gave the command. The landing began. Touchdown. The first dropships landed in a ruined city. Crumbling skyscrapers, rusted cars, shattered streets. This place had once been alive, but now it was nothing more than a ghost town. A team of Zavari soldiers stepped onto the ground, their boots crunching over debris. The air was thick with silence. Not even the wind moved. It was eerie. Vexa activated her scanner again. Still no signs of life. "Strange," she muttered. Humans were advanced, yet they disappeared without a trace. No bodies, no ruins of war. Just emptiness. Yelena didn't care. This was their home now. The Zavari set up their first command center, deploying drones to explore the city ruins. Advanced AI systems began constructing their settlement. It was all going smoothly, until they heard it. A sharp gunshot echoed through the dead streets. The lone human. The sound froze them in place. The Zavari warriors, highly trained and disciplined, immediately took defensive positions. Their weapons hummed, ready for battle. Yelena's heart pounded. That was not a random sound. That was a gunshot. Vexa's scanner beeped rapidly. A single life form detected. Before they could react, a second gunshot rang out, followed by an explosion. A Zavari drone, hovering near an old building, exploded into pieces. "We're under attack," one of the soldiers shouted. But from where? Smoke billowed from the destroyed drone, and then, out of the shadows, he stepped forward. A single human. Tall, armored, carrying an old but well-maintained rifle. His face was covered in dirt, his beard unkempt. His eyes, sharp, filled with something the Zavari did not expect. Fury. He walked toward them, completely unafraid. The Zavari, despite their training, hesitated. This was impossible. Earth was supposed to be empty. Yelena took a cautious step forward, gripping her plasma blade. "Identify yourself," she ordered. The man tilted his head slightly, then smirked. "My name is Jack Carter." His voice was rough, edged with defiance. "And this is my home." Before Yelena could respond, Jack vanished into the ruins. "Get him," Vexa shouted. The Zavari soldiers sprinted forward, scanning the ruins, trying to track him down. But Jack Carter was already gone. The alien invaders had just made their first mistake. They thought Earth was empty. They were wrong. The lone human. The silence after the attack was deafening. Commander Yelena stood frozen in place, her violet eyes narrowing at the smoking remains of the drone. This was not supposed to happen. Earth was empty. Her people's scans had confirmed it. No intelligent life. No threats. And yet, a human had just fired at them. Not just any human. This one had walked toward a squad of armed Zavari warriors alone, declared the planet as his home, and then disappeared like a phantom into the ruins. Lieutenant Vex's fingers danced over the holographic controls on her wrist scanner, trying to trace his heat signature. Her frustration was evident as she muttered under her breath. How? How did he avoid our scans? How did he survive? No one had an answer. Yelena clenched her jaw. This was an embarrassment, an insult. They had spent decades fighting wars against powerful species across the stars. The Zaveri were warriors, conquerors. They did not get scared off by a lone human. "Find him," Yelena ordered, her voice cold. "I want him captured. Now." Her soldiers obeyed instantly, fanning out through the ruined city, weapons drawn. But something didn't feel right. This human wasn't just hiding. He was hunting them. The predator becomes the prey. The first squad of Zaveri warriors moved cautiously through the remains of an old office building. Dust swirled in the air, and broken glass crunched beneath their boots. The walls were covered in faded posters, remnants of a world that no longer existed. One of the soldiers, a young Zaveri named Thalvin, held up his plasma rifle. His hands were shaking. "I don't like this," he whispered to his squadmate. "Something feels off." The moment he finished speaking, the ceiling collapsed. A steel beam, old and rusted, came crashing down from above, slamming into the squad's leader. Before the others could react, a blur of motion dropped from the shadows. Jack Carter. He hit the ground rolling, his rifle already raised. 2 clean shots, both headshots. 2 Zaveri warriors collapsed instantly. The third warrior lunged at him, swinging a plasma blade. Jack dodged, twisting to the side with practiced ease. He grabbed a broken pipe from the ground and smashed it into the alien's helmet. The Zaveri soldier fell, unconscious before he even hit the floor. Jack didn't hesitate. He snatched up the alien's plasma rifle and melted into the ruins once again. When the remaining soldiers arrived at the scene, all they found were 3 fallen Zaveri, and no sign of the attacker. Vexa swore under her breath. "He's toying with us," she growled. "One man against an entire fleet. This is a joke." But Yelena wasn't so sure. This wasn't a joke. This human wasn't running. He was fighting back, and he was winning. Jack Carter's story. Far from the Zaveri patrols, deep inside an abandoned subway station, Jack Carter wiped the sweat from his brow and checked his ammunition. It wasn't much. 6 bullets left. That was fine. He was used to fighting against the odds. He leaned back against the cold, cracked concrete wall, breathing heavily. His armor was scratched, his knuckles bruised, but he was alive. And as long as he was alive, Earth was not theirs. His gaze drifted to the old photographs still clinging to the walls of the subway station. Images of people laughing, celebrating, living their lives. People who were now long gone. He remembered when the world was full of life, when the cities were bright, loud, chaotic. Then came the war. Jack had fought in it. He had seen the sky burn, had heard the screams. The world governments had tried to fight back, but it wasn't enough. When it became clear Earth was lost, they evacuated. Millions of humans left, escaping into space to find a new home. But Jack Carter had stayed behind. Why? Because he had nowhere else to go. Because Earth was his. Because someone had to stay behind, even if no one else did. For years he had lived alone, hunting, scavenging, waiting. And now aliens had landed, thinking they could take his home for themselves. Jack Carter gritted his teeth, not while he was still breathing. The hunt continues. Back at the Zaveri base, Commander Yelena stood in the command tent, staring at the holographic display. She had seen war before. She had fought against brutal warlords, against unstoppable machines. She had seen entire planets burn. But never, never, had she seen one man wage a war against an army and succeed. This was not an ordinary human. "What do we do?" Vexa asked, her frustration evident. "Send more troops. Track him down. Use the hunter drones." Yelena was silent for a long moment. Then she turned toward the ruins and smiled slightly. "No," she said. "I want to meet him myself." Vexa looked at her in shock. "Alone?" Yelena nodded. If one man has survived here for years, fought alone, and still has the strength to defy us. I want to know why. She grabbed her plasma blade and stepped out of the command center, her eyes filled with curiosity. Jack Carter had declared that Earth was his. Now she wanted to know if he was worthy of it. The first encounter. The ruins of the city were eerily silent. Dust swirled in the fading light as the sun dipped below the jagged skyline. Buildings stood like hollowed-out skeletons, their broken windows staring like empty eyes. The Zeveri patrols moved cautiously, their sleek armor glinting under the twilight. They scanned every shadow, every movement, yet the human remained unseen. Commander Yelena stepped forward, her boots crunching softly against the cracked pavement. Unlike her soldiers, she walked without hesitation. She could feel him watching. The lone human, Jack Carter. He was somewhere in the ruins, studying her, deciding whether or not to attack. She had fought many battles across the stars, but never against one man. And yet, this single human had already proven to be more than just an obstacle. He was a predator, and she wanted to meet him face to face. Jack Carter, she called, her voice cutting through the silence. You are one against an army. This fight is pointless. You cannot win. For a long moment, there was nothing but the wind whistling through the broken towers. Then, from somewhere above, a voice replied. Gruff, steady, filled with quiet defiance. Neither can you. Yelena's lips curled into a smirk. So be it. The trap. Jack Carter was hidden on the upper floors of an old department store. His position gave him a clear view of the Zeveri below. He adjusted the rifle scope, his finger hovering over the trigger. He could take the shot. Yelena was standing in the open, completely vulnerable. One well-placed bullet, and this fight would be over. But Jack wasn't an idiot. This was a trap. The Zeveri wanted him to attack. He could see it, the way the patrols were positioned, the subtle way they held their weapons ready to fire the moment he revealed himself. Nice try, Jack muttered under his breath. Instead of firing, he moved, quickly, quietly, slipping through the shadows toward an exit. He needed to reposition. The Zeveri might be technologically advanced, but he knew these ruins better than they did. This was his battlefield. As he climbed down the remains of a fire escape, he caught sight of something, a small drone hovering nearby, scanning the area. Jack narrowed his eyes. They were learning. The Zeveri were adapting to his tactics, using drones to track movement instead of relying on their own eyes. Smart. But Jack had been fighting alone for years. He wasn't about to get caught now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a smoke grenade. Click. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it into the air. It landed near the drone, bursting into a thick cloud of gray mist. The drone's scanners flickered in confusion, and before it could recalibrate, Jack was already gone. The chase begins. Yelena's communicator buzzed. Commander, we lost visual. Vex's voice crackled through the earpiece. He used some kind of smoke device and disappeared. Yelena clenched her fists. Clever. This human was not just a survivor. He was a soldier. A strategist. He wasn't reacting randomly. He was calculating every move, staying ahead of them. Pull back the patrols, Yelena ordered. He wants us to chase him into the ruins, where he has the advantage. We won't fall for it. Vexa hesitated. But do it. The Zeveri units stopped their pursuit and regrouped, holding their ground instead of moving deeper into the city. Jack Carter might have thought he was leading them into a trap. But Yelena was setting one of her own. Jack's dilemma. Jack crouched behind a broken wall, watching from a distance as the aliens stopped moving. That was unexpected. Usually, enemies would chase. That was how battles worked. He attacked, they pursued, and he picked them off one by one. But they weren't following. Jack exhaled slowly. They were learning. And that meant he had a problem. His entire strategy relied on hit-and-run tactics. If the Zeveri weren't going to chase him, then he couldn't lead them into ambushes. If he couldn't control the battlefield, then he was just one man, outnumbered and outgunned. Dan. He needed a new plan. Jack glanced at his supplies. Low ammo, barely any food left. He had been surviving for years, but he couldn't keep fighting forever. Maybe it was time to try something different. Maybe it was time to talk. The meeting. Jack stepped into the open. The wind ruffled his jacket as he slowly approached the Zeveri forces. Dozens of plasma rifles immediately turned toward him, humming with lethal energy. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't show fear. He just walked, calm, steady, unshaken. Yelena watched him approach, intrigued. For a man facing an army, he looked almost amused. "All right," Jack said, stopping a few meters away. "You got my attention. So let's talk." Yelena studied him carefully. "You are alone, human," she said. "You have no allies, no backup. And yet you fight like a man with nothing to lose." Jack smirked. "Maybe I am." Silence hung between them for a long moment. Then Yelena did something unexpected. She lowered her weapon. "What happened to this world?" she asked. Jack's smirk faded. For the first time since the invasion began, his expression turned serious. "You want to know," he said, voice low. "Then listen carefully." He looked up at the darkened sky, at the ruins of the world that once was. Earth wasn't empty when you got here. It was abandoned. And there's a difference. Yelena tilted her head slightly. Abandoned. Why? Jack's gaze locked onto hers. Because the war never really ended. The hidden truth. Jack Carter's words hung in the air like the last echo of a distant explosion. The war never really ended. Commander Yelena studied him carefully, her violet eyes narrowing. The human stood firm, arms crossed, his rifle slung lazily over one shoulder. He didn't look like a broken man. He didn't look desperate. He looked like someone who had been through hell and had come out the other side harder, not weaker. Yelena had fought wars. She had seen planets burn, had stood on battlefields littered with the remains of civilizations that resisted the Zeveri Empire. But Earth was different. This was not a conquered world. This was a graveyard. And Jack Carter, he was its last ghost. "Explain," Yelena said finally, crossing her arms. Jack smirked, shaking his head slightly. "You aliens always come here thinking you own the place. You see some ruins, no people, and just assume you hit the jackpot. But let me tell you something, lady." He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping lower. "This planet isn't dead. Not really. It's just waiting." Waiting for what? Jack glanced up at the sky, as if expecting an answer to come from above. Then his smirk faded. For the war to start again. The fall of Earth. Jack took a slow breath, then began. Earth wasn't always like this. We had cities that stretched to the skies, technology that could do anything you could imagine. We had wars, sure, but we also had peace. We had families, dreams, futures. His voice hardened. Then they came. Yelena's brows furrowed. "Who?" Jack exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "We never got a name. Didn't matter, really. They came from the stars, just like you. They didn't ask to talk. They didn't send diplomats. They just arrived. And they took an invasion." "No," Jack said, shaking his head. "An extermination." Yelena frowned. She had seen countless planetary invasions in her lifetime. Empires expanding, species conquering, civilizations falling. But extermination, that was rare. They wiped out everything in their path. Cities, gone. Governments, collapsed. Military, overrun. We fought back, of course. We threw everything we had at them. Jack's fingers tightened into a fist. "And we lost." "If you lost," Yelena said carefully, "then why are you still here?" Jack chuckled dryly. Because we're stubborn bastards. He looked her dead in the eye. The world leaders made a choice. They gathered what was left of humanity, built massive colony ships, and got the hell out. They abandoned Earth, left it to die. A silence stretched between them. Yelena processed his words. The entire species had evacuated. That was unheard of. And you? She asked finally. Jack's smirk returned, but this time it was bitter. I stayed. Why? He shrugged. Because Earth is mine. The enemy that never left. Vexa, who had been listening quietly, suddenly stepped forward. If that's true, then where are they? She asked. If these aliens wiped out your people, why isn't your planet still crawling with them? Jack hesitated. For the first time, Yelena noticed uncertainty flicker in his eyes. That's the real question, isn't it? Jack muttered. They were here. They killed millions, maybe billions. And then, one day, they just stopped. Stopped. Yeah. No more attacks. No more ships in the sky. They just vanished. Like they were never here at all. Yelena exchanged a glance with Vexa. That didn't make sense. An extermination fleet doesn't just leave without finishing the job. Maybe they wiped out what they needed to and left, Vexa suggested. Maybe, Jack said, but he didn't sound convinced. Because deep down, he had a feeling. A terrible, creeping suspicion. They never left. They were still here, waiting, watching. And if the Zeveri had landed, if they were starting to rebuild on this planet, they would wake up the monsters Jack had been hiding from all these years. A warning ignored. Yelena took a slow step forward, her gaze sharp. You are telling me, she said carefully, that we are not alone on this planet. Jack exhaled. I'm saying, he said, you just walked into a war you don't understand. Yelena turned to Vexa, who quickly pulled up her scanner. Nothing, she said. No anomalies, no threats detected. Jack shook his head. That's what we thought too. He looked around at the ruins, then back at Yelena. You think I'm the last human on Earth? He asked. Aren't you? Yelena countered. Jack hesitated. Then, with a humorless chuckle, he muttered, Not exactly. Yelena and Vexa stiffened. Explain, Yelena ordered. Jack leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Some of us stayed behind. Not just me. People who refused to leave. Fighters. Survivors. They hid deeper than I did. Underground. In the mountains. In the wastelands. And Yelena pressed. Jack's smirk returned. This time, dark and knowing. And they don't like visitors. As if on cue, a distant explosion shook the ground. The Zeveri turned sharply, weapons raised. Jack? He just smiled. Told you, the resistance awakens. The explosion rippled through the ruins, shaking the ground beneath the Zeveri forces. For a moment, no one moved. Dust rained down from broken structures, the last echoes of the blast fading into silence. The air, once thick with tension between Jack and Yelena, was now filled with something far worse. A new threat had just entered the battlefield. Jack Carter didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed amused. He took a slow breath, rolling his shoulders as if stretching before a long-awaited fight. Yelena, on the other hand, immediately snapped into action. Report, she barked, tapping her communicator. Commander, Vex's voice crackled back. We've got incoming fire, unknown hostiles. They're using primitive explosives, but they're precise. They knew where to hit. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. You should have listened to me, Commander, he said, smirking. Earth wasn't empty. And now you've pissed off the people who stayed behind. Yelena's violet eyes locked onto him. Who are they? Jack exhaled, lifting his rifle as he scanned the ruins around them. The resistance. The ones who stayed behind. Long ago, when the world governments made the desperate decision to evacuate, not everyone agreed to leave. Some believed abandoning Earth was an act of cowardice, They refused to run, choosing instead to stand and fight. Jack had always assumed most of them had died in the chaos that followed. Apparently, he had been wrong. "They don't trust outsiders," Jack said, watching as shadows moved in the distance. "And they sure as hell don't trust aliens." "We're not your enemy," Elena countered, gripping her plasma blade. "We came here to settle, not to fight them." Jack gave her a sideways glance. "Yeah, tell them that." Another explosion erupted, this time closer. The Zaveri scrambled for cover as a hail of bullets rained down from the ruined buildings. Not plasma weapons, actual bullets. Crude, old-fashioned, but deadly nonetheless. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Jack stiffened. Ah, hell. A second later, figures emerged from the shadows. They were human, but barely recognizable as the people Jack once knew. Their bodies were covered in makeshift armor, patched together from whatever scraps they could find. Some wore old military gear, others had pieces of metal strapped to their limbs. Their faces were hidden beneath helmets and gas masks, their weapons scavenged and modified beyond recognition. But their eyes burned with hatred. "Jack Carter." The voice came from the tallest figure, stepping forward with a rifle slung over her shoulder. The others shifted slightly, waiting for her command. Jack sighed, lowering his weapon. "Damn, I was hoping you were dead, Rena." Disappointed. The woman, Rena, tilted her head, smirking beneath her mask. "You always were a stubborn bastard, Jack. But even you should have known better than to lead aliens into our city. Old friends, new enemies." Jack took a slow step forward, arms relaxed at his sides. "We don't have to do this," he said. "I get it. You don't trust them. Hell, I don't trust them. But we got bigger problems." Rena's smirk faded. "And what problems would those be?" Jack's expression turned serious. He gestured around them. "The ones that wiped out Earth. The ones who left us in ruins. They're still here, somewhere. And if we keep fighting each other, we'll be too busy killing ourselves to notice when they come back." Rena considered his words, then glanced at Elena and the Zaveri soldiers behind her. "And you think the aliens are on our side?" Elena finally spoke up. "We came here because we thought Earth was abandoned. We had no intention of making enemies. But if you're willing to listen, we may not have to be." Rena narrowed her eyes. "You don't belong here." "Neither do they," Jack countered. "And unless we work together, Earth won't belong to anyone for much longer." A tense silence followed. The resistance fighters shifted uneasily, their weapons still aimed at the Zaveri forces. Finally, Rena sighed. "You always did have a way with words, Carter." She motioned for her men to lower their weapons. "But I'm not making any deals." "Not yet." Jack nodded. "Good enough." Elena exhaled, but she didn't relax. This was far from over. The shadow that watches. Unbeknownst to either side, something stirred beneath the ruins. Far below, in the depths of the earth, a signal pulsed. A hive mind awakening. It had been waiting. Watching. The war had never ended. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to resume. And now, with the humans and Zaveri stirring conflict above, that moment had arrived. Deep underground, something opened its eyes. And it was hungry. The final battle begins. The uneasy silence between the resistance fighters and the Zaveri forces stretched long enough to feel like an eternity. Jack Carter shifted his weight, gripping his rifle loosely at his side. His instincts screamed at him to keep his guard up. The resistance didn't trust the aliens. The Zaveri didn't trust the humans. And Jack didn't trust anyone. "This won't last," he muttered under his breath. Elena, standing beside him, gave him a sharp glance. "What won't?" Jack exhaled, scanning the ruined city skyline. His gut twisted with an unease he hadn't felt in years. "This peace," he said, "it's not real. It's just the calm before the storm." And as if the universe wanted to prove him right, the sky cracked open. A warning too late. A deafening roar echoed through the ruins as an object hurtled down from the heavens. A massive, spiraling black spire crashed into the ground, sending a shockwave that knocked soldiers from both sides off their feet. Jack barely had time to react before the air split apart. An ear-splitting screech tore through the battlefield. Inhuman, alien, and ancient. "What the hell is that?" Reyna shouted, scrambling to her feet, her rifle snapping up. Jack's blood turned to ice. "They're back," he whispered. "The creatures that had wiped out Earth. The ones who had made humanity run. They had returned. The nightmare awakens." The black spire twisted and expanded, its surface writhing like something alive. A sickening wet sound filled the air as the first creature emerged. Its body was long and segmented, like an armored centipede fused with razor-sharp bones. Dark, glistening exoskeleton plates shimmered under the dim light. Its head, if it could be called that, was a writhing mass of tendrils, each ending in a pulsating, bioluminescent eye. And it wasn't alone. From the ruins, from the shadows, more of them emerged, crawling, slithering, hungry. Jack had seen them before, and he had barely survived. "Open fire!" Yelena roared, drawing her plasma blade as the Zeveri soldiers raised their weapons. "Light 'em up!" Reyna barked, and the resistance fighters responded instantly. The battlefield erupted. War on two fronts. Jack moved on instinct. His rifle barked as he fired into the mass of writhing creatures. Bullets ripped through their flesh, but it barely slowed them down. The Zeveri plasma weapons fared better, burning holes through the monsters, but more kept coming. "There's too many of them," Vexa shouted over the comms. "Hold the line." Yelena commanded, cutting through a creature with a precise slash of her blade. Jack shot 2 rounds into a creature's head, then spun to see Reyna struggling against one of the beasts twice her size. "Reyna, move." She barely had time to react before Jack tackled her to the ground, just as a massive claw swung through the air where she had stood. The creature let out a high-pitched screech, furious at its missed kill. Jack rolled, grabbed his sidearm, and emptied the magazine into its face. It collapsed, twitching violently. "You still hit like a truck, Carter," Reyna muttered, pushing herself up. "And you still owe me a drink," Jack grunted. No time for jokes. They were losing ground. The Zeveri fleet responds. Above them, the Zeveri warships in orbit had finally detected the anomaly. "Commander Yelena," a voice crackled through her communicator. "We are detecting massive energy signatures. Do you require orbital support?" "Yes," Yelena shouted. "Target the black spire." Now. Within seconds, the sky ignited. From the upper atmosphere, Zeveri battleships rained down columns of plasma fire. The black spire quivered and shook under the assault, its surface bubbling and twisting as if in pain. Jack looked up, squinting through the smoke and fire. "That better work," he muttered. It didn't. Because the spire fought back. A living weapon. A deep, guttural rumble came from the spire, almost like laughter. Then it retaliated. From its writhing core, tendrils of black energy shot into the sky, latching onto the Zeveri warships. One by one, the ships began to fall. Jack watched in horror as a massive battlecruiser lost control, spiraling down in flames. "Get down," he yelled. The warship crashed into the ruins with the force of a meteor, sending out a shockwave that shattered what little remained of the city. "We just lost 3 ships," Vexa shouted into the comms. "Pull them back," Yelena ordered. "They can't fight this thing from orbit." Jack clenched his jaw. "Then we kill it from the ground." Yelena turned to him, violet eyes flashing. "How?" Jack reloaded his rifle, rolling his shoulders. "We go inside." Yelena blinked. "Inside?" "That thing didn't just land here. It's connected to something below the surface. If we destroy it from the inside, we might have a shot." Reyna scoffed. "Might? You want to crawl inside an alien death tower on a mite." Jack gave her a dry smirk. "You got a better plan." Rena muttered a curse under her breath. Fine. But if we die, I'm haunting your ass. Fair. Yelena turned to her remaining forces. Half of you, hold the perimeter. The rest, we follow him. And with that, Jack Carter led them toward the heart of the nightmare. The war for Earth. Jack Carter adjusted his grip on his rifle as he stood before the towering black spire. The grotesque structure pulsed with unnatural energy, tendrils writhing as if the very thing was alive. It wasn't just a structure, it was a doorway. A doorway to something far worse. Behind him, Commander Yelena checked her plasma blade, her violet eyes sharp with determination. Beside her, Rena, leader of the resistance, reloaded her scavenged rifle, muttering curses under her breath. They were standing at the edge of a suicide mission. And they all knew it. Last chance to turn back, Jack said, glancing at Yelena and Rena. Not a chance, Rena smirked. I'd rather die fighting than let those things take Earth again. We started this war, Yelena added. Now we end it. Jack exhaled slowly. All right then, he muttered. Let's finish this. And with that, they stepped into the darkness, inside the heart of the enemy. The interior of the spire was worse than Jack had imagined. The walls weren't made of metal or stone. They were organic, pulsating like the insides of some massive creature. The air was thick, humid, filled with a scent of decay and something alien. This isn't a building, Yelena whispered. It's a hive. Jack kept his weapon raised, moving cautiously. The deeper they went, the more they saw. Cocoons, hundreds of them, lining the walls. And inside, Jack's stomach twisted. Human bodies. Rena breathed. Oh, God. They weren't just bodies. They were alive. Their chests rose and fell with weak, shallow breaths. Their eyes were open, but vacant, trapped inside some kind of stasis. Jack clenched his jaw. This wasn't just an invasion. It was a harvest. We have to shut this thing down, he growled. Now. Yelena nodded, pulling out a small detonation device. We overload its core, destroy the hive from the inside. Jack checked his ammo. Then let's move. We don't have time. We have even less than you think, Rena muttered. Jack turned and froze, because the cocoons were beginning to open. The swarm awakens. A deep, guttural screech echoed through the hive. One by one, the cocoons ripped open, spilling out twisted horrors. They were once human, but no longer. Their bodies were altered, warped by the hive, their flesh fused with dark alien exoskeletons. Their fingers had elongated into claws, their eyes glowing with an unnatural empty light. And worst of all, they moved fast. Run, Jack shouted, opening fire. The first abomination lunged. Jack shot it in the head, but it didn't stop. It just kept coming. They don't die easily, Rena cursed, pumping 3 rounds into another creature before it finally collapsed. Yelena slashed through 2 of them with her plasma blade, but more kept coming. The hive had awoken, and it wasn't letting them leave alive. Jack fired another burst before glancing at the central pulsating mass in the center of the hive. Yelena, plant the charge. Cover me, she shouted, sprinting toward the core. Jack and Rena moved fast, unloading round after round into the approaching swarm. The creatures screeched in fury, their bodies twisting and reforming even after being shot. They weren't just aliens. They were evolving. Detonator is set, Yelena called. Then let's go, Jack shouted. They sprinted for the exit, the hive shaking around them. But just as they reached the opening, something massive dropped down in front of them. The Hive Lord. The last stand. The Hive Lord was unlike anything they had seen before. It stood over 10 feet tall, a monstrous fusion of flesh and metal, its elongated limbs tipped with curved, serrated blades. Its body pulsed with dark energy, and its eyes, a dozen glowing red orbs, locked onto Jack and the others. This thing is the hive's leader, Yelena breathed. "Then we kill it," Jack growled. The Hive Lord charged. Jack dove aside as a massive blade sliced through the air, barely missing him. Reyna opened fire, unloading everything she had into the creature, but it barely flinched. Yelena leaped forward, her plasma blade cutting deep into its side. The Hive Lord screeched, swinging its arm and sending her crashing into a wall. "Yelena!" Jack shouted. She groaned, trying to push herself up. Jack turned back to the Hive Lord, heart hammering. There was only one way to end this. He charged. "Jack, no!" Reyna yelled. But Jack didn't stop. He dodged left, then right, avoiding the massive strikes of the Hive Lord. He jumped onto its back, driving his knife deep into its exposed flesh. The creature screamed. Jack ripped the blade upward, severing something important. The Hive Lord staggered, its movements glitching, like something inside had broken. Yelena, now back on her feet, saw the opening. "Jack, move!" Jack leaped back just as Yelena threw her plasma blade. The blade pierced straight through the Hive Lord's chest. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the Hive Lord collapsed. The remaining creatures screeched in agony, their bodies convulsing before dropping lifelessly to the ground. The hive was dead. "Time to go," Reyna shouted. Jack grabbed Yelena and Reyna, and they sprinted out of the hive as the detonator countdown reached 0. The end of the war. They'd barely made it out before the spire exploded. A blinding white light engulfed the battlefield as the hive was obliterated. The remaining Xaverian resistance forces shielded their eyes, watching as the nightmare burned away. Jack exhaled, collapsing onto the ground, exhausted. Yelena sat beside him, staring at the destruction. "It's over," she murmured. Reyna chuckled weakly. "Yeah, sure. Until the next nightmare comes knocking." Jack closed his eyes. He knew she was right. Earth had won this battle. But the war for survival never truly ended. For now, Jack Carter had his home back, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it again. Not ever. The end, for now.